My mother asked me to give up my house for my brother and said, "He's young, he still needs a career, and you, Lana, are already stable. Don't be so selfish." Her words were like a slap in the face, each word pushing me further into silence. I sighed, my heart aching. Stable? Just because I bought this house, does that mean I no longer have any right to it? Perhaps I had endured enough, but this time, I would do something they never expected. Since I was little, I had always been the one to sacrifice. No one taught me how to love myself. I only learned the invisible command that I should always put the needs of others before my own. Once, my mother bought me a cookie, but when Nick saw it, he immediately demanded to eat it. My mother didn't even ask if I wanted it. She directly handed it to Nick and told me to give it to him. "He's younger. You should take care of him," my mother said without even looking at me. I just clenched my lips, silently handing the cookie over to Nick. Even though I longed for it so badly, it made my heart twist. That was just one of countless times. Whenever I wanted something, my mother would always say, "You're the older sister. You have to give it to him." I never had the right to speak up or ask for anything for myself. There were times when I just wanted a hug, a word of encouragement when I was tired. But my mother would just say, "You're a girl. You must be independent, not weak." Those words seemed to sink deep into me, becoming a shadow I had to face throughout my life. When I faced difficulties, I was the one who had to bear everything. I learned how to do household chores, take care of my younger brother, and even handle my studies without help from anyone. Whenever I needed someone to listen, I only found silence or even coldness from my mother. "Endure. Everyone has to suffer," my mother would often say whenever I complained about something. When I was sick, on days when I had a high fever and couldn't even move, I had to fend for myself. My mother was still busy with her work, never once coming back to check on me, never a word like, "Are you okay?" or a warm hug. "You're a girl. You must be strong," my mother would say. So, I had to suffer through the fever alone, bury my head in the blankets, hoping to get through this illness. There was never any comforting, only the silence of a mother who had grown used to me taking care of myself. Gradually, I became accustomed to being the one who always had to sacrifice. My heart no longer demanded anything for itself. I only knew how to suppress every personal desire to serve the needs of others. Whether it was a time when I needed comforting words, a moment of sharing, or simply a cookie, I had to give it up. I had no right to ask for anything, no right to demand, no right to be cared for. My brother, Nick, was different. Nick was the child my parents spoiled and protected. Even though he had failed multiple times in his business ventures, the family always supported him unconditionally. Whenever he got into debt, instead of learning from his failures, my parents quickly reached out to help. My mother would say, "You're the son, you can do whatever and be forgiven." All their attention, love, and praise were for Nick, while I was just a shadow in the background, unnoticed by anyone. Every time he encountered a problem, I had to stand by and watch, even though I had been independent and worked tirelessly. My mother always told me, girls must endure, they shouldn't ask for things. But my brother, no matter what mistakes he made, was always protected. That feeling made me feel invisible in my own home. Unlike Nick, I could never rely on my family. Since I was little, I realized that my family would never be a support system for me. I always had to be independent, solving every difficulty without relying on anyone. Every morning, I woke up early to work part-time, earning money for my tuition fees during the difficult college years. My mother never asked if I had enough money for school. She would just say, "Girls must take care of themselves." On late nights, I would still sit at my desk, tired eyes, but not daring to sleep early, because I knew that if I didn't make an effort, I would have nothing. Whenever I encountered a challenge in life, I couldn't go back home and ask for help from my parents. Nick, on the other hand, was always supported. Once, I saw my mother write a big check for him when he failed in a business venture. My mother said, "My son should always be supported." But whenever I faced difficulty, my mother would just say, "Endure, girls must be strong." I felt like I didn't have the right to cry, to complain. But I knew that if I didn't stand up for myself, if I didn't fight for myself, I wouldn't get anywhere. I had no choice but to walk the difficult path alone. I worked part-time to cover my tuition and studied to get into university. The part-time job was not easy. I was always working long hours just to earn enough money for my studies and living expenses. Once, I worked the night shift at a cafe from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. After finishing my studies, I would clean up, serve customers, and then rush to class the next morning. I persisted like this, not daring to quit, even as my health began to deteriorate. When it came time for the university entrance exam, I couldn't afford extra lessons or expensive materials like my classmates. But I taught myself. Every night, I searched for materials online, wrote notes in my notebook, and tried to pass the exam through my own efforts. During those months, I felt the loneliness deeply. There was no one to encourage me, no one to care about my exhaustion. But I kept going, not wanting to give up. When I received my exam results and got into a good university, I knew that it was the result of many sleepless nights and continuous efforts. My mother simply said, "Well done, but don't forget, as a daughter, you must take care of the family." Her words once again reminded me that no matter how successful I was, I would still only be someone who depended on the family, always having to sacrifice for others. I rose to become a business consultant, achieving success thanks to my own strength and efforts. After graduating, my family didn't help me find a job. I had to look for opportunities on my own, sending out hundreds of CVs, attending interviews until I finally got my first job. I had no one by my side to guide me, no one to discuss my career with. I had to figure out ways to learn and develop myself. After a few years of hard work, I became a business consultant, reaching a respectable position in my company. These successes were the result of decisions I made on my own, with no support from my family. At the age of 28, I bought my first house, an achievement I had worked so hard to achieve. When I turned 28, I was able to buy a small house on my own, an achievement I had dreamed of for a long time. I remember the day I signed the contract for the house, feeling full of pride. It wasn't just a house, but a long journey filled with hardships and sacrifices. I had fought through every difficulty on my own, with no one behind me to support me. However, when I went home to tell my family, my mother coldly said, "It's just a house, Nick will have one too." I suddenly realized that no matter how successful I was, in their eyes, I would never be good enough. Without the support of my family, there was no one behind me to help me. I had achieved everything thanks to my own strength, but when I looked at my family, I felt invisible. When I bought the house, they didn't congratulate me, they just saw it as normal. I was the one who had to keep working and sacrificing to help them, while Nick never had to worry about these things. My mother still called me every time Nick had a problem, asking me to help. Each time I refused, she would say, "You've got a house now, can't you help your younger brother?" No matter how successful I became, no matter that I bought a house, my family never recognized me. I was still the one who had to sacrifice, the one who always had to carry everything for them without the right to demand or expect any support. In their eyes, Nick was still the favored child, and I, no matter what I achieved, remained invisible in this family. But I never hated Nick. When Nick and his wife asked to stay for a few weeks, I didn't refuse. Although I had a feeling that living with them wouldn't be easy, I couldn't refuse to help when they were in difficulty. At that time, I thought it would just be a few weeks. A short time, then they would leave, and everything would go back to normal. This house, which I had fought so hard to build alone, would once again be mine, and no one would take up space in it anymore. I imagined I could endure a few weeks of inconvenience, and then everything would be fine. But I didn't expect that within just a few days, those feelings began to fade, replaced by unbearable tension. They started occupying the living room, scattering their belongings everywhere. Handbags were thrown on the couch, old shoes were carelessly placed on the floor, clothes were discarded all over the ground. Every corner of the living room was now filled with their stuff, leaving no space for me. Every step I took in the house, I had to avoid the clutter everywhere. The room, which was already cramped, now felt even more suffocating and tighter than ever. Things that didn't belong to me, things that weren't mine, filled the space I had worked hard to maintain. I felt like I was being invaded, unable to breathe in my own home. They used electricity and water recklessly. Every morning when I woke up, I noticed the lights had been on all night. The washing machine kept running loudly all day, never stopping. The air conditioner was always on, even though the weather was cool. The electricity and water bills gradually soared. I tried to control my frustration, but every time I reminded them about saving, they would reply casually as if nothing was wrong. "This is the whole family's house. Why worry about it?" Those words felt like a slap in the face, making me feel like I no longer had any rights here. I was the homeowner, but they treated the house like it was theirs, and I was just a guest without a voice. Although I tried to stay silent and keep the peace, the injustice became more and more evident. I tried to endure, said nothing, but the unfairness made it impossible to bear any longer. Not only were they occupying my living space, but they also made me feel like I had no rights in my own home. Every time they complained about something, everything in my house became their issue. I tried to stay quiet, but every word, every action from them was like stones being thrown into my heart. They didn't stop making me feel like I was nothing in their eyes. Nick and his wife kept complaining about everything in the house. Although I tried to please them, every time I asked them to clean up after eating, Nick's wife frowned and mumbled in annoyance. "This old sister is so irritating, always nagging like that." That sentence caught in my throat. I couldn't believe she would say that in my own house. I tried to hold back, but my heart felt like a cup about to overflow. Just one more drop and it would break. Everything I had tried to hold in was now beginning to shatter. I could no longer pretend everything was fine. The frustration rose within me, and I asked myself, why do I have to endure this? Why are the people closest to me treating me like this? These feelings kept welling up, but I couldn't express them. In that moment, I felt tired, exhausted. It felt like I was invisible in my own home. One afternoon, after a long and tiring day, I could feel every heavy step I took on the cold tile floor. Fatigue enveloped my body, and all I wanted to do was lie down on the bed to forget the stress of the day. But when I entered the house, something strange made me stop right at the door. I heard a voice from the living room, clearly Nick's wife, speaking confidently without an ounce of hesitation. I paused for a moment, unable to understand why my feet felt as if they couldn't take another step. A vague urge made me listen, and I didn't expect that her words would hit me like a slap in the face, causing my heart to ache. "This house will sooner or later be Nick's. He's the son." Her words hit me like a sharp knife piercing my chest, leaving me breathless. Simple words, yet they carried an unbearable weight. How could I tolerate such a challenge and disdain? How could I continue living in this house, where even my own family didn't respect me? Those words felt like a deep cut in my heart, a wound I couldn't recover from. I stood frozen at the door, unable to believe what I had just heard. It felt like the whole world around me suddenly collapsed. Every memory of the days I had struggled, walked on my own, and built everything little by little, now became a mockery, a taunt from the very people I had once opened my heart to help. I could no longer endure it. My heart felt like a raging wave, crashing in cycles, but I knew that if I didn't act now, I would never regain the respect and control over my life. The feeling of being pushed into a weak position filled me with rage, but I didn't let my emotions take control. I quietly began gathering all the evidence of their invasion and exploitation. I silently turned on the cameras in the house, capturing moments when they excessively used resources, recording their deceptive conversations about taking over the house. I saved all the emails and messages between me and Nick, the hints that they didn't value my presence in the house I had built myself. The next day, I decided that I could no longer tolerate the exhaustion and the constant submission. I walked into the kitchen where they were having breakfast. There was no rush, no outburst of anger. I entered like a cold gust of wind, emotionless and detached. Both Nick and his wife looked up, but no one said a word. They didn't notice the tension in the air, the numbness I was feeling inside. I looked them in the eye, my gaze void of emotion but filled with determination. "You have 7 days to leave my house. The papers have been filed." A suffocating silence filled the space, as if the air in the room had stopped breathing. Nick and his wife were stunned, not saying a word. They stared at me, their eyes wide in disbelief, as if they couldn't comprehend what they had just heard. Nick's wife's face flickered with embarrassment, but she didn't dare to protest. She sat still, like an invisible shadow, afraid to move. Nick opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He looked at me as if he couldn't believe what he had just heard. Every passing second only solidified my certainty in my decision. I didn't wait for their resistance. No apologies, no justifications. I just looked them straight in the eye and said, "This is my house. I've been patient enough. No one has the right to exploit my kindness anymore." When I said that, a sense of liberation washed over me. I didn't feel guilty. I didn't feel regret. After all those years of living under the shadow of sacrifice and suppressed emotions, I had finally regained control of my life. All the patience, all the sacrifices, had now come to an end. I was no longer the weak one. In that moment, I felt like a new person, as if I had risen from the rubble and was stepping into an entirely new life. From that day on, there was no more silence, no more invisible endurance. No more feeling like I was worthless in the house I had built. And I was no longer the one who had to sacrifice unconditionally. The very next day, the phone rang, and I knew exactly what was happening. My mother called, crying uncontrollably. Her sobs hit my heart like a powerful punch. I could hear the pain and desperation in every breath, every word of pleading, but it didn't make me waver. My mother cried, saying I was cruel, that I didn't understand family bonds, that I had forgotten all their sacrifices. "How could you do this? You're a daughter. How could you treat your family like this?" My mother's voice echoed, incessantly sobbing. I stood still, not rushing to answer, just letting her words echo in my mind, like waves relentlessly crashing against the shore. As for my father, his voice was cold and filled with anger. "Why did you do this? How could you be so cruel?" His words were like knives cutting into my heart. The feeling of being criticized by the father I had always respected left me choked. He didn't understand. He didn't know that I had endured enough. Not just the disrespect from them, but also the exploitation from my own family. But I didn't respond. I just stood there, my heart slowly growing harder. Nick didn't let it go easily. He called me, his voice full of anger and threats. "You'll regret this decision. I'm going to sue you. You can't treat your family like this." Nick's words burned like fire, but I wasn't afraid. His anger no longer unsettled me like it did before. I had done everything to help him, but now, I no longer had to carry responsibilities that weren't mine. "I don't care. Do whatever you want," I replied, my voice calm, with no trace of worry. But I didn't feel guilty. The guilt they tried to impose on me couldn't touch my soul anymore. I was tired of meaningless sacrifices, tired of being a tool for others to exploit. All my life, I've only heard two words: endure. Today, I choose two new words: freedom. I said, my words calm, yet they echoed in my heart like a powerful declaration. I was no longer the small girl, always having to endure, always sacrificing, always standing behind everyone else. I had chosen a new path, a path of freedom, and I had no regrets. I stopped all financial support for my parents, cutting off every instance where I helped them, from small amounts of money to paying off Nick's debts. No more. For years, I had given them everything I had, but now I had to protect myself. I couldn't continue being the one who endured, the one who was exploited. I changed my phone number, deleted all contacts, so I wouldn't have to hear their reproachful words, their meaningless requests. It was the only way I could protect my mental health. This break wasn't easy, but I knew I had to do it. A part of me still felt pain, but the other part felt relief, as if I had thrown off a heavy burden. The comfort, the freedom of no longer being tied to people who didn't appreciate me, was a feeling I had never experienced before. 8 months later, my life had completely changed. I had decided to leave everything behind, to walk away from things that had held me back for far too long. I moved to London, a city that was unfamiliar yet full of promise. After years of living in the shadow of sacrifice, I had finally found the light for myself. I took on the position of senior consultant for an international company, a job I never dared to dream of while still living under the shadow of my family. Everything came naturally, but also full of challenges. Even though I had just started, I felt that I had achieved something significant. The job not only provided me with a stable income, but also gave me opportunities to grow personally and meet wonderful people. I rented a small, beautiful apartment near a park where the green and peaceful surroundings gave me a tranquility I had never known. This was the place where I found the peace I had long desired. I worked from home, no longer having to force myself to please others, no longer enduring meaningless sacrifices. My work was just work now, and I could focus completely on it without worrying about family responsibilities. I began learning photography, a passion I had neglected due to family burdens. Photography not only helped me relax, but also gave me a sense of freedom and creativity that I had never experienced before. I started capturing beautiful scenes in London, simple moments full of meaning that I had never noticed before. I also began making new friends, meeting people with whom I truly felt comfortable and respected. There were no criticisms, no one trying to take advantage of my kindness. These new friends not only broadened my perspective, but also taught me that I deserved a happy life, free from unreasonable demands. I no longer had to live in the shadow of my family. Every morning when I woke up, I felt the freedom in every breath. No more tiring calls from my mother, no more messages from Nick or my father, no more worrying about them. Life was now mine, and I had found myself again. Nick was now living with our parents, unemployed, deeply in debt. He couldn't find a stable job and seemed to be increasingly dependent on the family. When I heard news about him, I didn't feel joy or satisfaction, but a part of me couldn't help but sigh. He still refused to grow up, still wanted to rely on others. The words my mother used about helping Nick no longer made me feel heartbroken. I knew I had done the right thing by stopping my support for him, by stopping carrying responsibilities he didn't deserve. My parents, after years of relying on me, now had to take care of their own lives. Without me to help, they began to realize that they had become too dependent on the overlooked daughter. I knew they had to face the hard reality, realizing that they themselves needed to stand up and take care of themselves. My mother had once told me that I had to sacrifice for the family, but now I realized that even my mother needed to learn how to stand on her own. They began to realize how much they had relied on me. My mother's calls gradually became fewer, and there were no more reproachful words, no more demands for help. My parents had to manage on their own, but I didn't feel guilty. I knew I had done the right thing, and they needed to learn independence, just as I had learned to stand firm after years of exploitation. I no longer had to live in meaningless sacrifice. My life was now mine, and I had found the peace I had always been seeking. Have you ever been overlooked just because you always endured? When do you think it's time to say, enough is enough? If you've sacrificed too much without being recognized, my story may inspire you. Please like, comment, and subscribe to continue following the incredible journeys of those who quietly but powerfully turn the tables.